In this video, we're working with SLATE, our textured lava glaze, and I'll show you exactly how to mix, apply, and layer it for the best results. Let's get started. First, I start by shaking the jar vigorously. Different glazes settle at different rates, and some might be much more solid at the bottom than others. Usually, if they're freshly mixed, they'll be quite uniform. But if they set on a shelf for a while, whether in your studio or even in stock, there might be more of a solid chunk somewhere in the middle. And one of the best ways to get rid of it, instead of trying to mix it straight away, is giving it a good shape. It's just important to understand and get the idea that a glaze is not a solution, it's a suspension. So it is bound to settle. And in a way, we're constantly battling against that. So the first thing is definitely to shake it for as long as possible. Before we ship our orders, for example, we have a lab shaking table where we shake every single order to try and make sure that as little of settling as possible gets to you as the customer. So once you've done that, then we'll proceed to actual application, right? All the glazes might be slightly different in their consistencies. For example, if you've ever purchased a gloop glaze, that's going to be much more paste-like, almost paste-like, and crawl glaze certainly will be almost like clotted cream, very thick double cream. Another thing I like to do before applying the glaze is creating a kind of clear line for these tests to see where glazing is started. Depending on the shape you're working with, and also whether you're applying one glaze at a time, or are you layering, are you creating a kind of special effect, maybe you're glazing very low flat plates, etc. So we've got our glaze, we've got our piece. What's next? How are we going to apply it? And brushes are a really important part of it. In general, depending on the effect you're going, you might change what kind of brush to use. Is it going to be sort of a flat, quite thin brush, right? Maybe, which I do quite like, almost like ink painting brush, or which are some of my favorite. You can certainly see that through the visuals. That they're well used and well loved. These kind of Hake calligraphy brushes. I find that they allow for a good kind of loaded brush sort of feel. They retain loads of glaze, and also their wide flat surface allows for good coverage. So I use the brush as well as a kind of mixing mechanism, but that's where maybe if you do have some sediments, some harder bits of glaze that you would like to take another tool, any pottery tool honestly will do. One of my other advices here, if you do have anything hard, using a knife or maybe even a loop tool to create chunks first and then mix them in, rather than trying to just mix a solid part of the glaze. So once my glaze brush is well loaded, depending how runny my glaze is, I might take a little bit of the excess. With this kind of shape, I like to glaze it on the side, but you could be also using a turntable. Maybe you have a much more complex shape. That all will affect what kind of brush and approach to glazing you are using. So I will start with the first coat. I'm going to go up to 3 or maybe even 4 at the top, because this is quite a large test tile, to show a nice gradation. And as you could see, this white brush allows me to slide, and I also try and have a decent amount of glaze in one go that allows me to then move it around, kind of distributing the first coat in a very uniform way, trying to cover all the bits, and only then do I progress onto the next part. If I'm looking for uniform coverage, I do recommend doing quite a sort of cross hatch almost, or basically going in opposite directions. So you'll see that in the next coat I'm doing, I will be going parallel, or I guess perpendicular in this case, rather than following the same path of the brush. With these kind of textural, sculptural glazes, that might not be such a key thing to do, because the texture will sort of eat that all up, and that is true of a lot of other glazes. But you want most probably in the region of 2 to 3, or if you're more experimental and really looking for quite extreme effects, 4, 5, etc. coats, but probably 3 is somewhere quite optimal to be quite economic with your glaze, but still get the best of the effect that you're looking for. It's important to understand that coats doesn't mean me just literally going over the piece multiple times in the same instance, right? In general, your piece has a limited capacity of how much glaze it can take on. And in this case, it's not even glaze it can take on, but how much water it can absorb. So here quite a few different factors will keep on affecting or creating sort of slightly diverse effects. How thick is your bisque, right? How much thickness actually is there to retain water? What kind of clay body have you used, particularly in terms of grogginess and general sort of porosity that might be more present in clay bodies such as pizza clay or crank clay. So maybe it's a couple of minutes between the coats till it's dry to the touch. Maybe it's a bit longer based on also seasons, right? Maybe it's very cold in the studio and wet. One of the great ways to check, as I mentioned before, again, to touch it. Does it feel cold? Well, firstly, also, is it tacky? Is it sticky? Is it still shiny or matte? So since it's the first coat, we can see quite clearly it's dry, a little bit dust coming off, but it's easy to touch. No marks really remain on my hands, so it's pretty dry. So the next level is how cold is it? If it's close to room temperature and maybe slightly cold, most probably you're good to proceed for the second coat. But if you're feeling, as you're touching your glazed piece, that it's feeling really, really quite cold, most probably it's best to leave it for a bit. Maybe if you have to speed things up as well, use a hairdryer or a heat gun, pop it on top of a warm kiln next to a radiator to speed that process. So I would say for the second coat, this is pretty good. And I will keep going and maybe pause and let it dry a bit more for the coat number 3, right? So as you can see, I'm going in the opposite direction now, creating a more uniform approach, hopefully. And I'm leaving a little bit of space here at the bottom between the fresh coat and an old coat, because on the test tiles, I quite like showing, if the glaze allows for that, unless it's very runny glaze, a variation. What does it mean to apply a single coat? What does it mean to apply double, triple, and maybe I'll even do in the future a few extreme cases. So now I would pop it on a pause, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we return and do last coat. So on to our last third coat at the top of the piece, and making sure that there's plenty of glaze but it's not dripping all over. And I will just do the top part, and I will go again against the movement of the previous coat. As you can see, I haven't even picked up glaze more than once yet, but there's plenty to distribute. And take the piece, spread the generous amount. But even though I have waited, in this case, it's been about 15 minutes because the piece did feel relatively dry. You can see the way the glaze stays tacky and wet looking for much longer than the previous 2 coats. There's definitely more moisture sitting within the walls of the piece. At times people on large scale work, it might have been glazed inside, so this is the last little extra addition, almost like a cheat move of an extra brush. So once everything is tidy and cleaned up, it's generally quite important to keep your station clean, as well as the environment you're working in, because settled dust from dried out glaze is what can create long-term kind of concern or exposure to the dust, right? Breathing it in, accumulating it on your apron, on your table, etc. Once your piece is dry, your glazing is finished, I also then remove the tapes. A little bit of glaze got onto the rest of the piece, so that's where some sponging, maybe this broom. So now this is gonna go into kiln and we'll see the final result once it's been fired.